Hi, I'm Joyce Harper, and I want to welcome you to season 4 of my podcast, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? Together with expert guests and those with lived experiences, we will give you some tools to empower you to live a life of good health and happiness. Welcome to today's podcast with Jackie Lynch, Nutrition for a Happy Menopause. Jackie is an award-winning nutritionist, menopause specialist, author, and workshop facilitator. And in 2010, she founded the WellWellWell Nutrition Clinic, specialising in women's health and the menopause. And I met Jackie several years ago when I was on her podcast, and we talked about having a happy menopause. We are both people who feel very strongly that menopause can be happy, especially post-menopause. And Jackie now has 2 books out about nutrition and menopause, and we're going to be talking about that in the podcast. And I'm also guest on her podcast, which is coming out in a few weeks. So for the second time, she's had me on her podcast. So I hope you enjoy listening to Jackie talking about nutrition for a happy menopause. Welcome, Jackie.
Hi, Joyce. Great to be here.
And now you have been doing wonderful work around nutrition, especially around menopause. But can we start with you telling us about your menopause journey and what led you to become a nutritionist who's specialising in menopause?
Yeah, it's a great question. I looking back, I do feel very fortunate that when I was going through perimenopause and menopause, I had sometime prior to that left a big corporate job, and I was now working for myself as a nutritionist. I'd retrained, and it meant that I was managing my own time, because I think the level of stress that I was experiencing before that, even though it was a job that I loved, it was a very busy job, there was a lot of pressure. And now, of course, from a clinical perspective, I see the huge impact that stress has. So I think I was very fortunate that I was in a situation where I was much less stressed than I might have been 10 years earlier, for example, if I'd been going through menopause at that stage. So that made a big difference to me and my symptoms. But one of the things that I was affected by, which was a little bit of a medical mystery at the time, is that during perimenopause, on the first day of my period for about an hour, I would projectile vomit. And it was really difficult. So again, I was really happy that I was in control of my own time and at home, because it would have been incredibly awkward if I was in the office. And interestingly, the doctors were sort of slightly baffled by the whole thing. And I didn't associate it with perimenopause either, because we just never seem to join those dots, do we? And it was only when I spoke to my mum about it that she said, oh, yes, now you know how I felt. And then I remembered looking back, she used to call them migraines, but actually that's what was going on during my teenage years. She suddenly was sick quite a lot of the time. So it's, for me, it was... I felt very fortunate that I was working in the field of nutrition, and I was in a position to do some great research and look at what could really make a difference to me once I had finally joined the dots and become a bit less clueless about the whole thing. But at the time, I was a generalist. So when I qualified after my training, I was a generalist for quite a few years, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted my specialism to be. And I felt, that classic female imposter syndrome. Well, I can't be a specialist because I don't know enough. I have to be a generalist. And the irony of that is that generalists have to work far harder because you never know what condition people are going to turn up with. And therefore, you've got to research and work on a number of different things. And the reason I got into menopause nutrition was that I was asked to speak at a menopause conference, and I was a bit like, oh gosh, okay, what am I going to talk about in relation to nutrition in 15 minutes? Because it was a panel discussion, so I didn't have very long. And so I came up with my best ideas for 15 minutes, things that could be practical. And then what shocked me at the end is that I was absolutely mobbed by the women, sort of when we all went off to have coffee, who were saying, oh my goodness, thank you so much. I had no idea that my diet could make a difference to my menopause symptoms. And for me, it was a bit of a light bulb moment, because I realized at that point that, goodness me, there are all these women out there who literally don't know of the connection between nutrition and menopause symptoms. And that's something I feel passionate about, because I've been going through perimenopause, so I know that from a personal perspective, what a difference it can make. So that was what got me on the journey.
And it's so important. I think you've touched on a few things, obviously nutrition, but also stress. And I think that in today's society, we've got this view that everything's a quick fix. We can have a quick fix of anything, including perimenopause symptoms. But you and I, we've talked about this many times. For us, lifestyle is so important, and obviously for you, especially food. And you've written 2 books now about nutrition in menopause. So let's actually start there. Let's dig in to your books. Tell us more about what you've written in the books.
Oh, thank you. Well, my first menopause book, called The Happy Menopause, Smart Nutrition to Help You Flourish, is really, it's the A to Z of menopause nutrition, if you like. It's a symptom by symptom guide so that women who are struggling with brain fog and being uber busy and all those things don't have to read the whole book. They can just dip in to the symptom that's most relevant to them, that chapter, and then read about the different ways that diet and lifestyle can make a difference and what they can proactively do to support themselves. So I kind of see it as the mothership for the work that I do, because it gives you the full understanding of the different role of nutrition across the board for all the various symptoms. And I followed that up last year with a sister book, a companion book, if you like, which is called The Happy Menopause Guide to Energy. And that takes a different approach. It's really focusing on physical and mental energy. So issues around fatigue and brain fog, which we both know, Joyce, are big deals for a lot of women at this stage of life. And this is more like coming to my nutrition clinic, because, everyone can't come and see me, but everyone could work their way through the book. So it's a little bit like doing one of my 12-week programs where you start at the beginning, you work through the different things, the tests that you might need to do at the doctor, understanding what the results mean, because the number of times we're all told by the receptionist, oh, they're fine, and you don't even get to see them, and you don't even know what fine means, and it doesn't make sense to you because you're still feeling rotten. So how can I be fine? So really helping people understand how to unpick the results so they can have a meaningful conversation with their doctor. We have a section on macronutrients, so getting the basics right, the proteins, the fats, the carbs, getting all that side of things right, because that can make a huge difference to your energy levels. And then in my clinic, normally I'd send people off for blood tests to look at micronutrients, things like iron or vitamin B12 or whatever. Can't do that in the book. So I've created these little energy quizzes where people will look at the different symptoms in the quiz, and it will help them identify whether they might need to reach out to their doctor about their thyroid, or perhaps it's a B12 situation, or perhaps it's something to do with magnesium. And then there's lots of guidance on how you can change your diet and the different things you can do, even some advice on, targeted supplementation, which, as appropriate, always, of course, with the support of your doctor. So at the end of it, they create their own 5-step energy program, personal to them, just in the same way as they would have done if they'd come to my clinic. So the 2 books between the 2, one's the sort of overarching symptom guide, and the other is how to really get that energy back, get your vitality back.
I think that's just so brilliant. I think any woman who is feeling stressed, low energy, maybe they haven't got their nutrition right, they need to read your 2 books.
I think so too.
I really do, because what I'm seeing is that they're instead going on social media, listening to an influencer, the influencer,
Yeah.
or even worse, a doctor, and a menopause doctor is selling them a supplement without any of the things that you've said there. So they're not going to get the blood test. They're not finding out what are they actually needing any particular vitamins,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
what is it? So what people are doing now, there's a term I've seen called cyberchondria, where you go online.
Oh.
I know. You go online, and the other term that's come up a lot is the worried well. That we all think there's something wrong with
Yeah.
us, and that we've got
Yeah.
to take this pill or this supplement, and we're going to buy it online. We're not going to go and see you. We're not going to go and see our doctor. We're not going to have blood tests. We're just going to self-diagnose, listening to an influencer or someone selling something online.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you feel about the issues of social media in your field, in nutrition?
Well, it is a problem. I mean, it is a problem because, the long and short of it is you wouldn't take, I don't know, legal advice off social media or financial advice. Well, I hope you wouldn't.
I hope so.
And yet somehow you are taking medical advice. And I think people sort of assume that nutrition is, well, it's not medical and it can't do any harm, but actually it can do harm. If you're on medication, certain foods and certainly certain supplements will interact with those medications and actually counteract the effect that they should be having. So that could be a real problem if you don't actually realize that you shouldn't be taking them. I think the biggest challenge probably that I face is that the nutrition field is not regulated. So there's literally no difference between a nutritionist who, like me, has studied for 4 years before I got my qualification, and someone who's done a weekend course, or indeed anyone who can just use that title because it's not a protected title. And that, of course, makes it incredibly confusing because people can call themselves a nutritionist on Instagram, and how do you know? How do you know that what their qualification is, what their training is? How can you understand that? So as, a member of the public, just looking at someone who sounds incredibly convincing, you believe them. So it is a real worry.
Yeah, and we're doing a few studies on supplements. So we've looked at menopause supplements. We've done a couple of studies. One's of the papers already submitted. We looked at 201 menopause supplements that you can get in the UK, and it was quite bleak, to be honest. What was in them, what wasn't in
Wow.
them. And actually, we've just near the end of doing a reciprocal one on fertility supplements, and that's a lot better. They seem a lot more sensible. What's out there um, is more logical. But the menopause supplements was, I mean, we talk about the wild west of menopause. What's your view about what's happening with the supplements? Do people need to have a test first and then decide if they need supplements, or should they just go for it?
Well, it depends on the supplement. I mean, that's the thing. Nutrition's really complex. Probably most people would benefit from a decent multivitamin and mineral, but of course, a lot of these supplements, they're not just basic vitamins and minerals. They've got all sorts of other compounds in there. They might have phytoestrogens in there. They might have soy isoflavones in there. If you've got a history of breast cancer, taking supplements that's got soy isoflavone in, if it's an estrogen positive cancer, that's not advisable. So it depends what's in the multivitamin. I think it's really interesting what you just said about the fertility side of things. And I wonder if that's because the fertility market as such has been established for a much longer time. So it's probably found its level, and therefore the products that are out there are, good ones. Whereas menopause has really become a bandwagon. When I first started working on it, years ago, no one was talking about it. I felt like a lone voice in the wilderness. In the last few years, it's everywhere. And now, slap the word menopause on a face cream and you can double the price.
Yep.
Slap the word menopause on a supplement. But actually, a normal multivitamin might be just as good for you. Certainly, we should all be taking vitamin D. That's a bit of a non-negotiable for me. Definitely for women in menopause, but for anyone during the winter months in any case. And you don't need a menopause vitamin D, you just need vitamin D. So yes, there's definitely a space for these things. And yes, particularly if, you are under pressure, you're working really hard, you're perhaps not eating as balanced a diet as you'd like. It's not a replacement for that, but it can help to act as a little top up. And if you are super stressed, then you will be depleted in B vitamins, vitamin C, magnesium, zinc, for example. So all of those things can come into play. So it's not that you shouldn't necessarily consider it, but there's a broad picture around you and your health, your own medical background, whether you're taking any medication, what's going on. All of these things are things I would explore in my clinic with the individuals so that we then just would, if we are supplementing, pick something that's absolutely right for them and as safe as it could possibly be.
Yeah, you're right. Put menopause in front of it. It is. I'd say some of them I think are triple the price. Actually, we're looking at the prices
Mm.
now, and only 54% of the menopause supplements we looked at actually had vitamin D in, which
Oh,
was a bit.
crikey.
Yeah, but so
That's
that
bonkers.
bonkers. Absolutely, it was really frustrating. Really frustrating. And I see some of them say that they're going to make you have more energy. They're going to make you want to have sex more. You're going to lose weight. You're going to, all these claims, and that's something we're looking at now. But you've talked about energy in your second book. So what would your advice be to women who are feeling that they don't have the energy? It's what I'm hearing lots of women say, that they're always so tired and they haven't got the energy. What's your advice to them?
Well, first, get the basics of your diet right, because a lot of the time we are eliminating major food groups, either because we're the low-fat generation. Certainly, I'm the low-fat generation. I remember growing up, as a young woman with Rosemary Connolly's hip and thigh diet, which was all about low-fat, fat being the enemy. These days, it's carbohydrate. Everyone's saying, "Oh, it's got to be a low-carb diet. Let's all do keto." And the reality is, particularly at this stage of our life, you need all three macronutrients. You need fat, which is a rich source of energy, and also the essential fatty acids support brain function and make sure we're firing on all cylinders. We need carbohydrate because it is our primary source of energy, but it's a broad church. It doesn't mean you need to have loads of bars of chocolate, which, yes, is carbohydrate. It probably means you could do with more brown rice, more oats, more vegetables, more pulses, which are also sources of carbohydrate. So choosing smart, complex carbohydrate that your body will burn through more slowly, keep you going for longer. And then, of course, protein. Protein is not the body's preferred source of energy as such. It usually is only sort of, we go there if there's a bit of a state of famine. And that's when you'll get things like muscle wastage, because the body will sort of use up the protein that's in the muscles. But the amino acids found in protein-rich foods are used by the body to create key neurotransmitters that regulate things like mood, memory, focus, concentration, motivation, all these things that we struggle with when we've got brain fog. So first of all, getting that balance right is really important. And a lot of the time, just getting the basics in place, it'll be the first thing I'll do in my clinic. And it's amazing how easily people have sort of slid off getting that bit right, and what a massive, very quick difference it makes to do that. And in fact, in my first book, The Happy Menopause, there's a chapter called "If You Only Do One Thing." And that one thing is about getting those basics right and explaining to you how to do that. And in the second book, I've actually created a 14-day energy booster program, which is again about getting the macronutrients right. Because sure, it could be iron, it could be B12, it could be magnesium. But first, if you get the building blocks of energy, the actual fuel in place, because we all know if you haven't got any petrol in the car won't start. So you know, don't worry about the fine tuning till you've got the fuel right. So that will be the first thing I'd say.
And you're so right about everything changing. And we were the low fat generation. I am now drinking full fat milk.
Yay!
I've tried to get around it, but it's hard when you've been. And this is the problem with social media. It's you're brainwashed with all those things.
Yeah.
I remember when we were young, they said this thing: "Oh, butter's bad for you, margarine's better." And so through the decades, all of this advice has always changed. And I used to teach
it really
aerobics.
has.
Yeah, I used to teach aerobics in my 20s, and we always were reload your carbs, an hour after exercise. Now, my aerobics teacher just says protein, protein, protein. So it is so hard. But I wanted to ask you, with the women that come in your clinic, obviously they have very, very different issues around their nutrition. What are the common problems that you're seeing in the clinic?
I think the perhaps one of the most common problems is that they're not this. I know this sounds a little bit woo, but they're not practicing self-care. They're really good at caring for other people. If they've got kids, then they will make darn sure that those kids are having really good balanced meals. Same if they're caring for elderly relatives, they will focus on that. And yet somehow they'll skip breakfast, or they'll just grab a bit of toast at lunchtime because they're on the go. Yet they would have made sure that the children had something. And it's really important, I think. One of the first things I do is sort of sit them down and say, look, this is your time. This is your time. If you were giving this advice to someone else, you'd be saying, oh my goodness, you're not eating. If your child was doing this, if your precious niece or nephew were doing this, you'd be thinking, what are you doing? And yet somehow this is what you're doing to yourself. So the first thing we have to do is sort of really make sure that they are actually eating properly, eating good whole foods, eating regularly. That's sort of the first basic. And then I find that The midlife woman is a very stressed woman. We've got so much on. If we're juggling work and family life, that's a challenge. Very often women of that age have got more responsibility at work. They've moved up the ladder. There's more pressure. There's the sandwich generation situation going on with the elderly relatives and the family. There's often health issues in midlife, financial issues, the state of the world. Let's not even go there. And of course, relationship issues. All of these things can come into play. So it's a perfect storm of stress. And I've already touched on the fact that stress really, depletes so many of the key nutrients that support energy. So that's another thing I'll be looking at. How can we help to regulate stress? Because we can't always remove people from a particular situation. Life isn't that simple. So looking at, first of all, what can they do to manage their diary better? Be more proactive about factoring me time in, taking red pen to weekends so you actually get a proper break. And then looking at the kind of foods that will make you more resilient so that the body can deal with the challenges that you're facing every day. It can manage that stress response more effectively and therefore not deplete you and not drag you down so you're exhausted. So I'd be looking at blood sugar balance. That's absolutely crucial for stress reduction, because every time your blood sugar crashes, as well as feeling tired and dizzy and getting all those sugar cravings, cortisol and adrenaline are released in spades. So that's something we can change straight away, even if we can't remove you from your difficult boss or your awkward family situation or whatever it is. So we can do that. We can look at magnesium, which is nature's calmer. So most women, most people, frankly, aren't eating enough green vegetables. And it goes back to what we were told as kids: eat your greens, dark green leafy vegetables packed with magnesium. Magnesium, it's an energy booster. It's like our ignition key in the energy production process in the body. It's our nature's calmer, so it will reduce the stress. It supports muscle function, so you feel stronger. If you've got a twitchy eyelid, it's a classic sign of magnesium deficiency, so get those greens in. So I think it's a combination of factors that I see regularly: that sort of lack of self-care, the stress being ground down by the pressure of life. And so a lot of the time we're working on how can we build that resilience back up so they feel stronger and better.
Yeah, and for me with the stress as well, it's making sure the self-care, as you said, is so important. And back to that comment, it's not a quick fix. And you were one of the
Mm.
brilliant women that I'd interviewed for my book, The Wise Women. And
Oh, yeah.
one of the things you told me was that cooking is actually, a few of the women said cooking is creativity. And I think creativity is really important. And I think we need to make all of our lifestyle sexy, make these things, make exercise creative and joy, and
Yeah.
make sleep sexy, and make relaxing something that's sexy as well. But I think cooking as creativity is just a win-win. So what's your view? Well, I know your view about, but tell us more about cooking as creativity.
Yeah, I remember you asking me about creativity, and I'm not a naturally creative person. I'm the person who, when I've got to think about painting a room a different color, gets incredibly stressed and just doesn't do it because I think, oh crikey, I don't know what color it should be. I don't know what cushions will match that. But I do like cooking. I do like messing about in the kitchen, and I think it can be a really sort of mindful and quite a sensual experience, if you like, because if you go not to your supermarket but go to a good farmer's market or a farm shop or a really good greengrocers where they've got piles of fresh herbs, not under plastic, but in the cartons along the way, and you can touch things and feel them and think, that looks like a beautiful pepper. Let me take this pepper and I'll think of something I can do with it. And the great thing is you don't need loads of recipe books these days. You can type 3 ingredients in online and say, what could I make with this? So you don't have to create your own recipe if that's not your bag, but let the internet do it for you, and they'll come up with 15 different things you can do to make that pepper really exciting, and you can have a bit of fun with it. If you've got kids, you can obviously bring them into the kitchen and make them part of it. Really, really good for fussy eaters, by the way, because then they've got ownership of the meal and they're more likely to eat it, which is a great thing. baking, of course, I think that sense of, baking bread or baking anything really, but creating something from scratch and nurturing it, kneading the dough and bringing it along. It's all of these things can be incredibly satisfying. And of course, you've got the pleasure at the end of a beautiful meal or a beautiful loaf or whatever you've made, which has a real sense of satisfaction in the same way as someone who's more visually creative than I am would get from choosing the right paint and making the room beautiful, or creating a work of art, or doing a crafting thing. We all have our different aspects of creativity, but I think making cooking fun, given that we've got to do it anyway, makes it a win-win, really.
You eat it. What's not to love about that? You eat this wonderful meal that you make, and interesting. You mentioned about the supermarkets and not going to the supermarkets, going to there's great farm shops around. I mean, I'm lucky. I live in the country, so I'm surrounded by farm shops. But I have been more and more appalled as I've learned more about obviously ultra processed food and also the problem of plastics. So I've done a podcast about what the contaminants in our society, and obviously there's lots of television programs now about this. And you go around the supermarkets. I was horrified to learn that, in my view, there wasn't any healthy bread. So I did this years ago. So I have now become a sourdough bore, and I make my sourdough every week. But I
Love a
love,
bit
as
of
you
sourdough.
said, oh, but yes, you said the folding. It's so simple, and
Yeah.
it's and my sons, they're all away at the moment, and they one thing top of their list is my sourdough, because they know they can't get bread like this in a certainly not in a supermarket. So what do you think, Jackie, about ultra processed foods?
Yeah, I mean, I should just say, of course, I do go to supermarkets. I'm not spending my entire time spending a fortune at the farmer's market.
Same.
It's about the balance. I mean, I do think it's nicer to get fruit and vegetables when they're not packed in loads of plastic, because you can touch them, you can smell them, and you can look at them. So that's sort of what I meant there. So don't everyone think I'm being super precious and making life really difficult, because that's not my style. But I mean, ultra processed foods are complicated, and I think to a degree, we've all got a little bit paranoid because there's been a lot of talk about ultra processed foods. And we do need to recognize that food processing, to a degree, is really important, because it's what makes our food safe. It makes it safe for us to eat. So we have to sort of recognize that there will be for most of the things that we eat, there will be an element of processing. I mean, cheese is a processed food in that it has gone through a process. It's not the core of milk. It's not the original thing. So, the things that you'll get in the supermarket, they will also be fine. But it's when you start to get things that they've got multiple ingredients on, you don't know half the words on there, they're not things that you'd be keeping in your own larder or food cupboard, and you don't even know where to start when you look at the ingredients, then we're talking ultra processed food. And there's a couple of problems with that. One is that food manufacturers are really smart, and they know how to create combinations that will actually stimulate the pleasure receptors in the brain. And how addictive is ice cream? There are lots of people who, they can't get enough ice cream. It's their comfort food. They've always got it in the freezer. They'll go to it. They'll have spoonfuls of it out of the big tub. And manufacturers are really good at that. So they're really good at creating these things that taste good, that make us think we want more of them. And the trouble is, they have been ultra processed, that there's very little nutrition in many of these things. And so if you're eating that, what are you missing out on? That's the question. What are you not getting because you've had this in your meal? So the more you can cook from whole foods, and then it's fine. Of course, hummus is a processed food. There are lots of things that are processed food. A cracker's processed. It's fine to have those things as well. But what you don't want to be having is those sort of uber deep fried, those chicken things, or you can get in those fried chicken shops, or large amounts of, nothing wrong with the occasional pizza as a treat, but if pizza's in your diet several times a week, along with other kinds of fast food and junk food, that's an awful lot of ultra processed food. Your body doesn't really know what to do with it. You're not going to feel great on it, and you're going to be missing out on a lot of key nutrients.
I think it's a year and a half ago now that I gave up biscuits, sweets, chocolate, ice cream. I don't know why I put ice cream on the list. I love ice cream. Desserts. Have I said everything there? I think I've said everything there. And cakes. And actually thinking now, all of those things are foods that have carbohydrate and fat in. And I think for me, that
Yeah, yeah,
addiction,
yeah.
I was addicted. I was absolutely addicted. And now I don't have it. I must say, people try to make me eat it every day. Almost every day I'm with somebody that, oh, have this piece of chocolate, have this cake. It's so lovely. But yeah, for me, there's something maybe to unpick there about the addictive nature of eating carbohydrate and fat together.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's an interesting one. And of course, I'm not saying you can't ever have a cake or a biscuit, but the reality is that a homemade cake is going to be much better because, what is in a cake? Well, it's flour, it's sugar, it's eggs, it's milk. That's basically what's in a cake. But when you look at a cake that you've bought, particularly one of the ones sort of from the long life shelf, it's going to have hydrogenated fats in there almost certainly because that prolongs shelf life. And you look at it and it's got way more ingredients than the four I've just mentioned. So it's just sort of thinking about choosing your treats wisely and judiciously so that you're actually getting something that, yes, is a delicious treat, but also is a real food.
Yeah, right. Good advice. Lots for us to think about there, which I love. Um, Now, obesity. So I did a podcast at the end of last year about obesity and the issue that is for our health. And now we've got another quick fix with the weight loss
Oh, we
drugs.
have.
What do you
Yeah.
think?
It's a worry. It's a worry. So these weight loss jabs that are so easily available now that people can just get them online, often lying about their weight because they, actually only need to lose about half a stone and normally wouldn't be eligible. I think they have their place and they can be a game changer for people who are struggling with compulsive eating disorders and obesity and such like. But in those cases, those people are supported by their doctor. And the reality of these jabs is that they do a number of things. They suppress your appetite. So there's a very real risk of not eating enough, malnutrition, if you will, because a lot of the time people feel quite nauseous. So it's easy not to eat when you're feeling nauseous. So people aren't eating enough and they're often eating much smaller meals. It also has an impact on the production of hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which the body needs to break down protein foods, but also is really crucial for the absorption of iron, vitamin B12, zinc, and calcium, for example. So there's this sort of long-term issue looking forward as if you're not absorbing your calcium, what might this be doing for your bones? So when you're working with a doctor around that, all of that is taken into account and you're getting the support that you need and the advice that you need. Anyone listening who's using it for themselves, what you need to recognize is, okay, I need to make every meal count. If I'm not eating that much, I've got to really make sure I'm putting in my leafy green vegetables. I'm getting my protein in so that every single mouthful is important. So don't waste it on having a bar of chocolate because you won't want anything else after that. You'll be full, but you won't have got any nutrition. So you've got to think really smartly about it. I think it is a worry, and I'm really surprised that they've been made so easily available because generally speaking, it's incredibly difficult to get prescription drugs and so on. And yet here is this thing where we can just self-prescribe. And I think it's causing a lot of problems. I think also, of course, affecting people who have a history of disordered eating. That's a real worry that this thing is available for those sorts of individuals. And it just removes the joy of food, the biggest pleasure of food, which is this sort of sensual experience of flavor and smell and taste. And yet somehow we're just sort of removing ourselves from that. It's not easy to lose weight. I know that. I work with lots of women who struggle to lose weight, and it's a long-term game at this time of life. It's not the kind of eat less from Monday to Friday, get in the little black dress on Saturday, which you could do in your 20s. It's different in midlife. But, that there are ways of doing it. You need to sort of retrain your metabolism, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And the trouble is, you talked about the quick fix. We love a quick fix.
Yeah. That's what made me think, but going back to obesity. So we now have this term menobelly. And I personally, I would like to hear what you think about it. I find it a bit triggering because when I've looked at the data, men and women, as we age, we put on weight. And it seems that, well, I see a lot of men with what we could call menobelly. They to be totally frank, they look quite pregnant. But we don't call that menopause. We used to call it middle-age spread, but now everything's blamed on the menopause. So what's your view about weight gain and menopause?
Yeah, it's not absolutely a given, and I think it's another one of those ways that we're creating a degree of fear-mongering around menopause, because we're thinking, oh, on top of everything else, I'm going to get fat. You do need to rethink the way that you eat, because inevitably, for men and women, our metabolism changes as we age. We just don't need as much food. Quite often, women will come to me and they'll say, "Oh, I don't know why I can't lose weight. I have a really healthy diet." And I think, "Oh, well, we'll see." And then I look at their food diary and think, "Oh no, fair enough. It is a really healthy diet, but there's just too much of it." So we need to be thinking about our portions much more carefully. Really thinking about that good quality protein and fat and carbohydrate, but just the portions. We need to sort of recognise that. We probably don't need to be snacking. Whereas before, when we were younger, a snack to keep us going was probably a good thing, keep the blood sugar stable, and that would be great. But now we probably don't need to be eating between meals. We need to let the appetite hormones do their thing, because basically when we eat, our blood sugar rises a little bit. It's designed to do that. Insulin comes out. Insulin's job is to store fat. And over time, insulin declines, and then, it's time for the next meal. And in between times, once insulin's come down, a hormone called glucagon comes out, and glucagon is our fat burner. So that's great. You've got this little exchange between insulin and glucagon, fat storage, fat burning, and that should keep us where we are. But if we keep topping ourselves up between meals all the time, glucagon never gets a look in because insulin keeps coming out each time. So it's looking much more carefully at the balance of the hormones, which you didn't need to worry about when you were younger. But, come midlife, come menopause, you've got estrogen, progesterone dancing around. You've got cortisol, insulin, adrenaline, glucagon, you've got leptin, all these things that govern our appetite. And suddenly everything's a bit out of control. So getting the balance of those hormones right is really crucial to managing your weight. So it's not a given that you're going to gain weight, but inevitably you do need to be rethinking a little bit about what's right for you in terms of the kind of food you're putting in your mouth.
Yeah, here. I totally agree. I've totally changed how I eat. And yeah, when we're younger, we could get away with eating that packet of biscuits, but not now.
No, sadly not. And you're
Sorry.
right. Sugar is incredibly addictive. I mostly don't eat chocolate because it doesn't take long for me if I have a bit of chocolate to think, well, I want the next one and the next one. And I had some chocolate last week because there's a lot of Easter stuff around at the moment, and I have noticed. Every day I'm thinking, oh, shall I get some chocolate? I'm thinking, no. But it's very insidious sugar. And it doesn't take long for the tentacles to start sort of spreading so that you feel that need. So we need to be, sadly, a bit more disciplined about things because it's not easy. None of this is easy.
No, and for me, I had many friends, including friends that nutritionists, say, "Oh, don't totally deprive yourself; it will be too hard." No, for me, it was my addiction, and I had to just say no. And now I can sit in a room with a box of chocolates the whole weekend and not want. Well, I might flicker and think, "Oh," and I think, "No, I'm not going to break it now." So I might never eat chocolate or a cake again.
Crikey. Well,
I'm
that's
okay. I'm okay.
impressive.
I've eaten enough. I've eaten enough. Jackie, are there any other myths or misunderstandings that we haven't talked about yet that you see around food and especially menopause?
I think I briefly touched on the low fat thing, so I want to come back to that because I think there is this sense of, fat will make us fat. If it wasn't called fat, we probably wouldn't all get so confused. It needs a bit of a rebrand, poor old fat. But here's the thing. Saturated fat is used by the body to create sex hormones. So if ever there was a time in life when we needed our sex hormones, it's now. So getting good quality saturated fat in our diet, full fat products, really, really important. We don't need too much of it. It's about 20 grams per day for women is the recommended amount. But, you should be thinking about getting the good fats in. And then the essential fatty acids are really important because they support heart health, which is really important post-menopause. I know you touch on this again in the book. and brain health and hormone balance. So it can help with all these things. So I think not demonizing fat is really important. And often, I say to women, well, if you do want a little snack, no, I said no snacking, but sometimes you have to snack. Think about maybe some almonds with a piece of fruit. Oh, but aren't they fattening? Well, they're not as fattening as a Mars bar. You need that fat. And the great thing about an almond is that it's also got, magnesium and zinc and all these other brilliant things in there. It's a source of protein. So I think getting past that is a big one. I think there's quite a lot of worry about soya. Now, soya is contains some compounds called isoflavones, which are a group of foods known as phytoestrogens. And phytoestrogens essentially mimic the action of estrogen in the body. They influence our estrogen receptors and can really promote hormone balance. So they can be very helpful for women who are struggling with issues like hot flushes, night sweats, and those classic menopause symptoms. So soya is a good source of that. And of course, lignans, mainly found in things like flaxseed or pulses, lentils, chickpeas, beans, and so on. And a lot of women say, well, isn't there some connection with soya and cancer or something? Well, sort of just to clarify, there are, first of all, it's thought that the historically low level of menopause symptoms experienced by women in Asia is down to the fact that they follow a traditional diet of fermented soya. They haven't turned it into milk, which is what we've done with soya, thinking, oh, that looks good, let's make some milk out of it. They're having things like tempeh and miso and natto, or the whole edamame bean. So, these are things that could be really supportive for you. So you might want to be having a think about that. Obviously, anyone who's got an estrogen-sensitive condition, like endometriosis, they'll have had some advice from their doctor as to whether they should or they shouldn't be having things like oral phytoestrogens like flaxseed and soya. But generally speaking, the received wisdom is that in food form, they're perfectly safe. It's supplement form. And I touched on that earlier, the sense that some of the menopause multivitamins have got soy isoflavones in. So you need to check those kinds of things and just make sure that that's okay for you.
Yeah, brilliant. So let's go a little bit beyond menopause. So let's go to longevity, which is a hot, sexy topic at the moment. Everyone wants to live forever, apparently. And we're seeing people that are doing all these weird things to themselves in the aim that they're trying to look younger. I won't even go into some of the things they're doing. How important is nutrition to healthy aging?
Well, it's fundamental, but you knew I was going to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really, isn't it? Because it's what you put in. I know it's a sort of trite phrase to say you are what you eat. I mean, technically you are what you absorb, but the principle remains. I think one of the things that's worth knowing about anti-aging is that it sort of comes down to our DNA. And on all our different DNA strands in the body, we have these things called telomeres, which are like small caps that go on the end of the DNA, a little bit like that sort of plastic bit you get on the end of a shoelace. And every time, they're quite long, every time a cell divides, they get a little bit shorter. Essentially, the younger the cell, the longer the telomeres. And our cells are dividing all the time. That's just part of what's going on in the body. Now, the shorter the telomere, the slower the tissue repair. So it'll take you longer to recover from injuries like sprained ankles or cuts or grazes or whatever. Wrinkles and organ function. They're not going to work as well if your telomeres are shorter. And the great news is we can make our telomeres longer. Yay! So it's not just, oh, crikey, as you get older, they get shorter and there's nothing to be done. And there are some really fundamental pillars to that. Exercise supports longer telomeres. Good quality sleep, and I know that's at a premium, but of course, as you come through menopause and beyond, your sleep will improve again. Stress reduction, stress shortens telomeres. Bring that stress down so that they start to grow again. And then from a diet perspective, well, it's all the things you've been told you should be having loads of. Berries, brassica, so broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, legumes like lentils, chickpeas, beans, oily fish, salmon, sardines, and so on. So these things, you're having these regularly in your diet, will promote the telomere health, which is going to make a huge difference to, essentially the action of your DNA and the impact that it has on every body cell and every body function. So I know I keep going around in circles saying eat this, eat this, eat this, but there's just the great thing about nutrition is that it's this fabulous network. If you eat your greens, you're going to do loads of different good things. You're going to lengthen your telomeres. You're going to get the energy from the magnesium. You're going to get the fiber. You're going to get all these different things that you can get there, so that it makes a massive difference in lots of different ways. So eating the right diet and looking after yourself is crucial. And I think, good quality protein to support your bones, good quality calcium, all these things, making sure that you're getting the right balance. I think once you go through menopause, you said everyone wants to live longer, but we don't just want to live longer. We want to live longer, healthier. It's about health span, not lifespan, which I know is something you talk about in the book, because there's no point in sort of living till you're 100, but for the last 30 years, you've just been stuck in a care home because you can't move. You want to be the one who's sort of, these elderly ladies you see going around sort of they're the ones who bring Meals on Wheels or running the volunteer places in hospitals. And you think, oh, good, aren't they amazing? And they're about 85 and they're running around busy as anything. And that's what we need to be. And we need to make sure we're fueling ourselves correctly to achieve that.
You've just made me think about something else, because you've said a few times about eating things. So what about this craze of smoothies? Now, they seem to have gone up and down, but I still see lots of things about smoothies. Is it okay just to put all of those yummy nutrients, those foods, whole foods, in a blender and then drink it? What's your view on that?
Well, again, it's a bit horses for courses. There are a few reasons why it's not the best thing ever. One is that smoothies tend to be very high in fruit. People tend to chuck in a whole load of different fruits, and that's, basically it's all broken down to sugar, because we've got these like really incredible blenders now, haven't we, with mega blades that really break everything down. So they break down the fiber, and it's just not going to be. It's just going to be full of sugar. That's the first thing. And we've talked already about the impact of sugar on so many things, our brain, our weight, and so on. But also, it depends what you put in. If you're going to put in protein, so if it's like a smoothie that's maybe got 3 vegetables, so maybe it's avocado, cucumber, spinach, one fruit to make it a bit less hardcore, sweeten it up a bit, and then you'll put some ground flaxseed in, or maybe some, if you've got a really good blender, some nuts or some Greek yogurt, and then you turn it into something. That can be, not a bad thing. It's never going to be as nutritious as having the whole food, because you're going to be missing things. The longer you leave a smoothie, the faster it oxidizes. So essentially, you're going to become a bit less nutritious. But for some of my clients, I'm working with them and they're thinking, well, I just don't have time to do this in the morning. And if I make this, I can then drink it on the train. I think, okay, well, let's do it. Let's make up something that, a combo that's going to be full of protein, full of fiber, and then a little bit sweet, so that it's not too, awful to drink. So it has its place. And it's also I think juicing is not a bad shout either, because you can get, if you're very bad at eating certain vegetables. I, for example, don't really like celery. I don't mind it as the base of a soup or something, because you don't taste it. But it's not something I dip into my hummus ever or put in a salad. And yet, celery is really good for you, and it's great for bringing blood pressure down. So I can shove it in a smoothie or in a juice, and then suddenly I'm getting my celery. If you're particularly bad at eating all the vegetables, I'd like 5 a day, 5 veg a day, by the way, not fruit. If that's difficult, well, again, chucking a couple in a smoothie might be a way of making it more palatable and possible for you. So I think we have to be practical and pragmatic about it, but also just make sure that it just doesn't turn into a large glass of sugar.
Yeah. I think to make it taste nice, you have to put something in it. Jackie, in my book, the first question I asked almost everybody, and I've been discussing a lot in the last few weeks, is everyone's view on aging. So I've asked this before, but I wanted to ask you again on this podcast. Jackie, what's your view about aging?
I think aging's great. And I think I probably said this to you at the time. I feel as I look back that each decade's been better than the last. You know, you're more experienced, you're more confident, you do things, you can build on what you've learned. Um, I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun. I'm about to turn 60 and I'm very excited about that, because I want to have a lot of fun in my 60s and really make the most of things. And I think that it's inevitable. So there's no point in crying over it because it's going to happen. But what you can do is make sure that you age as well as you possibly can, that your telomeres stay as long as they possibly can, as I've just explained, that you maintain a sort of youthful approach to life so that you try new things and you give things a go. Because it's easy to write yourself off and say you're too old for that. Well, the chances are you're not too old. You might need to do whatever it is, perhaps in a slightly different way, but there's definitely be a way of doing whatever that thing is. So I think life's a journey, and you should be enjoying adventures along the way, and that those adventures shouldn't be confined to the young. They should be happening with every decade.
I know you talked a lot when I interviewed you about travel and adventures, which I absolutely love. So I'm going to lead that into the final questions of the podcast. Jackie, what makes you happy and where is your happy place?
I'm probably happiest when I'm reading a book. I've always been a very keen reader since I was a child, and I've always had my nose in a book, and that is the fast route for me to relax. Sends my blood pressure down straight away, brings the stress hormones down if I've had a really busy, difficult day. So that's sort of my preferred source of happiness, I suppose. But I get happiness from lots of different things. I'm someone who loves change. I do get bored quite easily, and I have changed lots of things in my life. I've lived in different countries. I've upended my career and gone back and studied something different and become a nutritionist. I've tried different things, and I like change. So for me, I'm happiest when I'm trying something new, whether it might be a new walk that I haven't done through a forest or an area I don't know, country I've never visited, a different book. I'm a great rereader, but I do love a book I've never read before. So that's a different journey for me. So I think I like variety. My life has always been all about change and variety, and I think I'm happiest when I've got a book under my arm, but I'm also just about to try something new.
I love it. I love it. And I really love your sense of adventure. Really came across when we did the book interview. And the very final question, again, something I've asked you before, and you can say this to your personal self or wider as to younger women. What advice would you give your younger self?
Don't worry about what other people think. Most of the time, they're not even thinking about you. Just crack on and do stuff. Have adventures. Don't be afraid to try things. Trust your instinct. It's usually right. And we don't often listen to ourselves as much as we should. And I think just really make the most of life. It's the most incredible gift that we've got. And I think that you want to make sure that you're not going to look back, when you're in that care home I mentioned, thinking, oh, if only I'd done this. Because, no one ever says, oh, I wish I'd spent more time at work. But a lot of people are thinking, oh, I wish I'd done X, Y, or Z. So try things, do things, and don't be afraid.
Jackie, you really are a wise woman and you've shared so much wisdom with us today. And I've learned a few things I'm going to think about it a little bit more. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and chatting to me.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.